Masechus Gittin Daf Ayin Zayin finishes off the seventh parak of the Masechta, parak Misha Achazu, and it's two short sugyas that finishes it off, and then it quickly begins the eighth parak of the Masechta. So the first sugya at the end of the seventh parak is discussing three different ways you can phrase a tanai that you make on a shtar, a tanai that you make on a get, and the question of is it implying that the get should take effect retroactively from when the tanai is fulfilled, or only when the tanai is fulfilled? Nafkamin would be if the husband had died before the fulfillment of the tanai. If it was retroactive, it would take effect. If it was after the fulfillment of the tanai, it would no longer take effect because he died at that point. So the Gemara here identifies, it's Abaye, he identifies three levels of what you could have said. So one is you could have said lechisha, when it will be. So let's say he says it's at night and he gives his wife a get and he says lechisha teitzi chama minatika, when the sun will rise then your get will be chal. Similar thing would be in our Mishnah. Rashi compares it and says this is what Abai is trying to get to. If he says when I will come back after 12 months, then the get will be chal. So he means at that point, and then if he dies before the sun rises, or if he dies before he ever gets a chance to come back, the get is only chal afterwards, at the end of the 12 months, or when the sun rises, and therefore it can't be chal because he died by that time. Now the opposite extreme is if he says al menas, where he says on the condition, so he says on the condition that the sun rises, or on the condition that I don't come back after 12 months, then he definitely means retroactive, and then even if he dies, it's definitely chal from when the condition is fulfilled. The case with this machlokes is if he says im, he says if. He says if the sun rises, and he says if I don't come back at the end of 12 months. There you have machlokes, you have the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yosi. The Rabbanan hold that he means it to be, since he didn't say ma'achshe, he didn't say from now, he means it to take effect later at the end, and if he died, it's no good. And Rabbi Yosi says, since there's a date on it, he means it to take effect from the time of the date itself. That's why he says if. As the Gemara, this is related to a machlokes on that exact topic that we had at the end of the last daf. Now, our next sugya before the end of the parak concerns the last line in our last Mishnah, where we had a discussion as to what happens if he says write and give a get, and he makes a tanai, but the question is the writing included in the tanai, or is the writing without the tanai? So the Mishnah, the way we have it, say as follows. If he says the tanai first, so if he says, if I don't come back after 12 months, write and give a get, that means that the writing is for sure conditioned on the tanai. The Mishnah does not record a machlokes there. The Mishnah says that if they wrote the get before the end of 12 months, it's definitely no good because it's violating the tanai. If, however, he says write and give a get if I don't come back after 12 months, so now the question is it right, stam, just write the get, and give it if I don't come back, or is it write and give if I don't come back, that the writing is also included in the condition? That's a machlokes. Tanakama says it is included, and if they wrote the get before the tanai was fulfilled, it would not be chal, because it's in violation of the tanai, and Rabbi says no, it's not included, and it's fine, and doesn't matter when they wrote it, it's okay. Now the Gemara wants to propose, perhaps he basically argues even on the first case, even on the case where he said, if I don't come back, write and give a get. And Rabbi is not arguing as to whether the word write is included or not. Rabbi is arguing on, is it permitted to write the get even before the tanai is fulfilled, even though the writing of the get is conditional? Because who cares? Let the writing of the get be conditional. As long as he's not going to give the actual get if the tanai is not fulfilled, it's fine. Who cares when you wrote the get? So the Gemara wants to suggest maybe that's what Rabbi holds, and therefore even if he clearly said, if I don't come back within 12 months, write and give a get, and they went ahead and wrote it anyway, even before 12 months, that'll be okay. And says, no, you don't see from here that Rabbi argues on that. It could be Rabbi only arguing on when he said write and give a get. If I don't come back, is the writing included in the tanai or not? Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa discussing if somebody says after a certain time, how long is that after? So if somebody says, if I don't come back after the next Shemitah cycle, then you have a full year after Shemitah. The entire 8th year is called after the Shemitah, and he has to not come back for that entire year for it to be chal. So it's not chal till the end of the 8th year. If he says, if I don't come back after a year, so then it's the after period is the month at the end of the year. If he talks about a month, then it's a week. If he says after Shabbos, how long is after Shabbos? So the Gemara quotes Rabbi Zera, who was sitting in front of Ravasi, and they said, and some say Ravasi, and it was in front of Rav Yechanan, and they said, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are considered to be after the Shabbos that precedes it. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are considered to be before the Shabbos, which is coming up. So after Shabbos is 3 days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Says the Gemara in a Brisa that Rebbe said if he says after Yom Tov, that goes for 30 days. Rabbi Chia went out and said that as a drasha. So first time he said as a drasha the name of Rebbe and everybody praised him. Then he said the name of Harabim and they didn't praise him. Obviously they wanted it to be only recorded as Rebbe's opinion, so that's a das yachid. It's a single person's opinion, and it was not the halacha. When he said it as being the name of the Rabbim, as being the majority, people did not approve because that is not halacha. This is the end of the 7th parak. Now we begin the 8th parak, parak hazerik. This parak discusses the halacha about if he throws a get into her property or into her person, when could that be claimed a get for her? It's not put in her hand, it's put in either her yard or her house. That can be considered an extension of her hand. What are those halachas? So the Mishnah begins with 3 cases, 3 different scenarios. One is if he throws it into her exclusive property. Rashi says that's nichsei malug, property that she owns the guf and the husband owns the fruits. So if he throws it into her yard or to her house, then it counts. It counts as her yad, it counts as her hand, and it's as if she received it, and the get is chal. If he throws it into his own house or yard, even if she's there, even if it's near her, even if it's near her on the bed, even if he's together with her in the bed and he throws it right to her, that doesn't count because it's in his property and it's not her yad, so she's not divorced. If he throws it into her lap or to her basket, which she's holding, then she is divorced. That also counts as to her person, and the Gemara will explain it. The Gemara now begins. The Gemara wants to know, how do you know the halacha that a chatzar or property can be kind of for her? The get. So the Gemara says, the pasuk says v'nasan biyada. Biyada implies it has to be only her hand, but v'nasan includes other types of giving, and that's into her roof, into her yard, into her field, into her shed, into her backyard storage, all these things. Rashi says that it could have said biyada yitnena. The fact that it's v'nasan biyada includes other types of giving that are included. Now, the Gemara now says a similar discussion is found about a thief. If somebody steals something by it coming into his possession, not his hand, it's still considered to be stolen. Not going to mean if he has to pay kefel if he's found to have stolen something. So the Brisa says that it says his hand. It says if it's found im himotze timotze biyodeh, if it's found in his hand. I didn't know to include if it's found in his roof, in his yard, or in his backyard. So it says himotze timotze. That's a double expression if it's found anywhere in his property. Now, why do I need a pasuk to say it by get and by stealing, that both of them are considered to be an extension of his or her hand or property? Someone says you need it. By a get, it's easier to be an extension of her hand because it works bal karcha. She doesn't have to have participation in it. And since she can be divorced against her will, you would assume that she has more receiving ability. But a thief, maybe since he can't be forced to steal something against his will, it doesn't count. Therefore, the pasuk has to tell me not only by get, but also by stealing. And if it only said by stealing, it would know by get, because it could be by the get. They cast him, the Torah fined him for stealing, and therefore they made it belong to him even in additional circumstance and made him responsible for the theft in additional circumstance. But that you would say the same thing by a get, you don't know. All right, now the Gemara asks another question. The Gemara says, how is it possible that she has property of her own? Anything she owns belongs to her husband. We mentioned this when we learned the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, he made her have her own property by saying, I have no claim on your possessions. He said, he wrote for her, Din udvarim ein li b'nichsach. I have no claim on your possessions. So the Gemara asks, that doesn't transfer ownership to her. Everybody says, if somebody says to his friend, I have no claim on this field, and I have nothing to do with it, and my hand is withdrawn from it, none of these count, because he didn't transfer possession. He maybe wanted to remove his own control over it, but he didn't give it over. So here, how does it help for him to give it over to her? Someone says it's different. It's talking about where he never was kona in the first place, where she had possession of it before the marriage, and then he said before the marriage, before she ever brought it into the marriage and into his possession, he said, I'm having nothing to do with it. That prevents it from ever entering his rishos in the first place. You're right. Once it's in his rishos, he can't get rid of it by saying something like, I have nothing to do with it, but it can prevent it from entering his rishos, and therefore it stays in her rishos. This is similar, the Gemara says, to halacha we've seen from Rava, that a person can refuse the Takanas Chazal. If Chazal created something, a certain rule for his benefit, he could say, I decline the benefit, and therefore he has a right to say, I decline the property that my wife is bringing into this marriage. Now, Rava had said an example like this. What was Rava referring to? So, says Rava was referring to the rule that a man gets his wife's earnings and she gets support from him. She has a right to say that kind of was made for my benefit, so that I'll get supported. If my own earnings are worth more to me than his support money, I decline Chazal's takana. I'll keep my own earnings, and he can keep his support money. Okay, this is the Gemara's first explanation of how she has her own property, and that property is able to be kind of the get. The Gemara now gives another answer, and this comes from Rava, and Rava says that the property is no different than her actual hand. Her hand also belongs to her husband, and if the hand has the ability to be kind of the get, there's no reason that the property can't. How does the hand work? So Rava says there's a rule called Gittin Daf. She gets her hand through getting the get. She gets the get and her hand in the same instant. And the get is what frees her, severs her connection to her husband. She gets the get, the hand gives her the get, and the get gives her the hand. They come together. Neither one can start without the other, but they work at the same time. Now, this is svara, which needs some explanation, but that's what Rava says, and this is the same thing could apply to her chatzar, not just to her hand. Now, the Gemara asks, what was Rava referring to that he had this kasha? How does she get her hand? Her husband owns her hand. Her husband doesn't own her hand. Her husband owns the produce of her hand. Chazal gave him the right to her earnings, which is the produce of her hand. But he doesn't own her hand. She owns her own hand, and therefore she can receive her own get. So Gemara says, no, Rava was referring to an eved. An eved, his rabbi most definitely owns his hand, so how does he receive a get? Shechor. Obviously, then you have to say this Gita v'yade bank echad thing, so you could say Gita v'chatzera bank echad as well. And Gemara now shares with us the story by which Rava came to the conclusion that you have this halacha of Gita v'chatzera bank echad. The Gemara says it was a man who was very sick, and he wanted to give his wife a get so that she shouldn't fall to Yibum. So he had to get written Erev Shabbos close to Shabbos, but he didn't get a chance to give it to her before Shabbos. But on Shabbos, he became extremely sick. His condition became very serious, and he's afraid he was going to die before the end of Shabbos. The problem was he could not give her the get on Shabbos because it would be carrying. He had no way to get it to her. So they came to Rava to ask what to do. So Rava said, let him be makne, the room in which the get is lying, to the possession of his wife. How's a kinyan going to work? So they'll do a kinyan chazaka. The halacha is that if you are given a house or a field and you lock the door, so you're showing ownership, and that's a chazaka. So let him make a kinyan to be makne to her, and then she can go and open the door, lock it, go inside the room. The room belongs to her, and then she will be claiming the get which is in it, and then she's received the get and she's divorced through that. Now, Gemara says that's what Rava suggested, but Rava Ilish said, but how's it going to help? As soon as she's kind of the room, it goes back to her husband's possession, because anything that a woman owns is owned by her husband. So Gemara says Rava was embarrassed. He had been shown to be wrong there. And then it turned out that she was not really married. She wasn't a Nesua, she was an Arusa. She had only had Kedushin, but not Nesuin. So they wanted to say, so maybe the Arusa's possessions don't belong to her husband. And Rava said, no, it's not true. If an Nesua's possessions belong to her husband, and Arusa's possessions also belong to her husband, but this doesn't help. So Rava therefore said, it makes no difference, because you have the rule of Kana Isha Kana Baila. You say, Gita v'chatzer bank echad. She takes possession of the yard as well as the get. At the same moment, each one brings the other. The get brings her independence, and the yard brings the get. So Gemara says, Rava already said this before. Why was he first embarrassed? We already have this from Rava. So Gemara says, Rava, this is where he got it from. This is when he was Mechadesh that, and this is where he came to that conclusion, and therefore he didn't have it before this. Gemara now comes to Machlekes if she has to be in her chutzner or near her chutzner in order for the chutzner to work for her, or if she could be anywhere. So Gemara brings this Machlekes. Ula says she has to be standing in the chutzner. She says she could be standing in Tveria and chutzner in Sipayri, or vice versa, and it works. So the Gemara says our Mishnah said that she's in the chutzner or she's in the house, so clearly she has to be. So Gemara says it doesn't mean, according to Rav Aishia, it doesn't mean that she has to be there, but it has to be as if she's there, meaning that she has control over it. It can't be like an Eved who could just walk away. She has to have control over it. So therefore, our bottom line of Machlekes is, what do we learn? She has to be near her property for it to work for her as yad, or she just has to have control over it. It has to be what we call mishtameres, protected. Okay, now the Gemara wants to get to the root of this machlokes. So the Gemara is going to try two options. First answer is to say, what is the lumdus of a chatzar? How does it work? One Tana holds that it's an extension of her hand, and one Tana holds it's like her shliach. It's like a messenger of hers. If it's supposed to be her hand, so then just like her hand is near her, it has to be near her, and she has to be therefore near or in it. If it's just her shliach, so it could be far away, just like her shliach is far away from its sender. The Gemara says that can't be the pshat, because if you're going to learn that yad means near, so why should yad mean only nearby? A yad is attached to a person, so maybe the chas has to be attached to her. That drasha wouldn't make sense. So Gemara says no, everybody agrees that it's yad, and the question is, how do you define the drasha of yad? Just like yad is near her, it has to be near her, or do you say just like a yad she has control over, she also has to have control over it? So the question is all within the definition of yad. And the Gemara now brings a case here. The Gemara says, what if somebody threw a get to his wife in a yard and it landed on a piece of wood? So the Gemara says, if the piece of wood has a din of a separate rishus, like we see in Hilchos Shabbos and Hilchos Eruvin, you have a separate rishus, then it's not megureshes, and if it's the same rishus, then it is megureshes. The Gemara has three ways of defining what a separate rishus is. The Gemara at first says, if it's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, the surface is 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim wide. The Gemara later gives another 2 ways of defining it: if it's 10 tvachim higher than the ground, or if it has its own name. If this area is being given a property name of itself, if it's called something else, then it's called a separate rishus. Now the Gemara says, what's the case here, and why does it make a difference if it's a separate rishus? If it's her yard, so then if you have a separate rishus within the yard, it's still hers. And if it's his yard, and you have a separate rishus within his yard, it's still his. So what difference does it make? So we're talking about where it's his yard, but he lent her space within the yard for her to be kind of to get. So we assume that he lent her only one space. If it's a separate rishos, he didn't lend her that other rishos, and that's why she's not kind of if it has a din of a separate rishos.